Hey everyone, and welcome to our, I lost count, but welcome to our summary, analysis, and synthesis lecture. And as you can imagine, we will be talking about summary, analysis, and synthesis. Usually I break this up into three lessons or three voice threads, but since I'm doing an instructional, I figured it makes sense to just put it all in one. For me, these three terms are key terms in writing successfully, in being able to show that you are critically thinking about something. And so that's why we're spending a whole unit developing these skills. I find that summary, analysis, and synthesis actually do go hand in hand. So if you're finding that there's some overlaps between what each of these concepts require, that is on purpose. That's actually sort of suggesting that all three do require critical thinking, and that's why some of the steps are similar. So, in order to further support the fact that these three concepts are important to successful writing, I wanted to just show you a sample GRE prompt. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the GRE is an exam you take if you're interested in going to graduate school, and the GRE requires a math portion, a verbal portion, but then it also requires a writing portion. And so this is a prompt from the writing portion of the GRE. And so you'll see the prompt reads, "The best way for a society to prepare its young people for leadership in government, industry, or other fields is by instilling in them a sense of cooperation, not competition. Write a response in which you discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the claim. In developing and supporting your position, be sure to address the most compelling reasons or examples that could be used to challenge your position." And so what I suggest here is, in order to successfully complete this kind of prompt, you need to be able to summarize, analyze, and synthesize. And so again, prompts like the one that we just read, they require you to summarize a complicated idea. They require you to interpret, for example, interpreting what leadership means, interpreting what cooperation means. They require you to take several different ideas or several different people or several different fields and put them in conversation with one another. And they also require, these prompts require you to find links between seemingly unconnected or disconnected ideas. The autoethnography is also going to ask that you do similar tasks. It's going to ask that you summarize personal experiences. It's going to ask that you summarize outside sources. It's going to ask that you analyze these personal experiences, that you analyze sources, and that you synthesize outside sources and synthesize outside sources with personal experiences. Now, if you're not familiar with any of these terms, do not fear. We didn't really go over it yet, and we will in a couple of minutes. So let's break down what summary is. For most of us, we've heard this definition of summary. A summary is where you tell me the main ideas about a whole work, right? So summarize this book means tell me the main points of this book. And that, for the most part, is true. However, I want to push you to do more than just give me the main ideas of a work. I want you to think of a summary as a space where you report on the important parts of a work. And by important, I mean things that the reader or things that your reader has to know about this work, or things that this reader must know about this work. A summary also is you reflecting on this whole work through a particular lens, and then explaining the work through your particular lens using details. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to actually have us watch a video, and then we'll sort of apply these steps together so we're crystal clear on how it works. So I had every intention of playing the video or the film that I wanted you all to watch, but upon initial upload, I was blocked by Disney because I technically it's a copyright violation. So I'm going to provide a link to the Vimeo website where I was able to watch the short film. I ask that before you continue on with this video, you watch this film first because the summary that I provide will really only make sense after you've watched the video. So sorry about that, but blame Disney, not me. Hopefully that video was also fun to watch. It's one of my more favorite short films. Okay, so let's just remind ourselves. I'm saying that a summary should report, reflect, and explain. Report on the important parts, reflect on the work through some lens that you choose, and explain this work through that same lens that you choose using details from the work that you're summarizing. So if I were to summarize this video using the steps that I just described, the first thing I would want to do is just identify the important parts or the parts of the film that I think the reader must know about. So for me, and I hope you'll all agree, the important parts to tell the reader, the important parts to tell the reader is it's a cartoon, that the title of it was Sanjay's Super Team. It's about a father and son. The son wants to play with superheroes. The dad wants to pray. It's about religion, and it's about two different generations. So for me, these are the really important parts of the film that a reader has to know. And if the reader wants to, tell other people about this film, those would be the things that they would also want to share. So we all come away with like a strong understanding of Sanjay's Super Team. So notice one of the things that I noted as an important part was the title. That's I think we all probably have heard this before, but I just want to say it again. In a summary, it's really important that you give, pertinent like author's name, title, if it's a film, title of the film, if it's an article, title of the article. Those are important things to mention in a summary. Okay, then, and I think this is the part that trips up most of my students when I first bring it up, we have to figure out what lens we want to talk about it in. So when I say lens, I want you to think about what struck you about this video. What are you interested in? What were you focused on? What could you not get your attention away from? And so another way to think about this is, were you interested in the form of the video? Form can mean like the coloring, the music, the sound effects. The fact that it was a silent film, for example, right? Like there wasn't any dialogue really, except towards the end. Did the structure of the video or the text interest you, right? So like in terms of this film, it was structured that where it was basically in a living room and then in this like space that, exists but doesn't really exist because it's not in the world that they live in, right? Word choice. So if you were reading something, is there a word or a phrase that you really were interested in? Themes. And I say history here because sometimes when you're reading something, what you're really interested in is the connection it has to history, or maybe you're interested in the history that is revealed through the text. So these are all ways that you can figure out what lens you're interested in looking at your text through. These are not all the ways you can look at something, right? You can look at something with a focus on the way women are treated. You can look at something with a focus on how race is treated. You can look at something with a focus on how I'm trying to think of how the environment is treated, how history is presented. There's no shortage to the amount of lenses you can use when summarizing a work. I'm interested in the theme focus. I was really interested, and this is true when watching this film, about what it's saying about generational conflict. So, generational conflict meaning the conflict between the father and the son. So, that's the lens I'm interested in. If that is the lens that I'm interested in, generational conflict, what details do I want to bring in from the film to sort of flesh out this lens, or flesh out this idea of generational conflict? And so the details from the film that I know I have to bring up, the fact that the dad wants Sanjay to pray, but Sanjay wants to play. The fact that the son doesn't really try to understand what praying means. At least that's what I understood when watching that film. He's not interested really in why they're supposed to pray. He's just frustrated by the fact that he has to pray, period. Um, and in that sequence where the gods are fighting this like three-headed, I don't want to say demon, but like this three-headed monster maybe. It seems like that's the first time where Sanjay starts to see the similarities between these gods that his dad prayed to and the superheroes that Sanjay looks up to. And then the fourth thing that I feel like I want to bring up is at the end. I mean, the ending to me is amazing, which is why I'm interested in generational conflict. The end, they're both looking at this picture and they're both happy. Like the dad's feet are up in the air and they're both smiling. And that's actually the first time where you hear the dad talk. So those are all details I feel like really show my focus or my interest in generational conflict. So then the next part would be putting this all together in some sort of paragraph form. And so I've done parts of it. I haven't done the whole summary because I don't think we need to for you to understand how this works. But let's just read what I have here. Sanjay's Super Team, a Pixar film, offers a solution to a generational conflict. In the film, Sanjay loves playing with superheroes while his dad is more interested in praying. This difference leads to conflict in the film because Sanjay's dad wants him to pray while Sanjay would much rather be daydreaming about saving the world. So in terms of how I organize this, I use the meal paragraph strategy that I talked about in the first instructional. You'll see this is the main idea sentence, then I give an example, then I explain it, and then I explain it some more. Also notice I do give the title of the work in my first sentence, which like I said is an important thing when you're summarizing. And again, it's clear that my lens is this generational conflict because I mention it in the first sentence. But I still give important details about the film, right? The fact that the main character is Sanjay, the fact that there's a dad, the fact that it's really about Sanjay wanting to play while his dad wants him to pray. And then I move on to the next paragraph and I write, the film suggests the reason for this conflict comes from the lack of compromise. Sanjay refuses to care about praying, and Sanjay's dad refuses to take an interest in his son's games. It is only when Sanjay is taken into the world of his dad's gods that the gods show him the similarities between superheroes and gods. And then I would probably continue on to talk about what these similarities are, and then also talk about maybe in another paragraph, when they are able to compromise, when they do see each other's interests, they are not in conflict anymore. And so again, I am summarizing the film. I do tell you the important parts of the film. I haven't left anything out, but I'm telling you the important parts through a lens that I have picked. And that's the difference between a summary at a non-college level and a summary at a college level, in my opinion. A lot of instructors, I'm sure, will tell you that no, a basic summary is a basic summary, but I'm of the mindset that I'm not, if I wanted to just know about the main parts of the film, I would just watch it for myself. I'm interested to hear about you break down the main parts of a film using an angle or a focus that sparked your interest. That's why I'm asking you for the summary and not just going to watch the film on my own. Um, and so just again, you can figure out what lens you're interested in by asking yourself, what struck you about this work? What did I pay attention to? What theme did I notice? What do I want to focus on? And so if you'd like, I'm going to give you three possible comments that you can post on this YouTube video. The first is you can summarize a work that you choose. Now, this work can be a resource that you're planning on using for your autoethnography. It can be a film, it can be a book that you've read, but I want you to summarize at a college level using the techniques that I just mentioned here. The summary should be, again, between 5 to 8 sentences. So if you're curious or you want the practice, by all means, post that summary below. Now let's get into analysis. What is analysis? So for the most part, we've all heard analysis to be thinking a lot about something, critically thinking about something, and I think all of these definitions are true, but what does that actually mean? So analysis is the act of breaking something apart and looking at it through a particular lens. Now, this should sound familiar because we just talked about lens with summarizing. And I'll explain how analysis is a little bit different, but mostly it's similar to what summarizing entails. So if I were, for example, to analyze Beyonce's Formation song from, I guess at this point it's a couple of years ago, I would first break the song apart and I might focus on the use of ladies. And so I might then, if I'm interested in her use of ladies, I might use something like a dictionary lens, which basically means I look at how the term ladies has evolved over time, and that I use that evolution of the word ladies to discuss formation. So I might discover that ladies way back when was like a term of endearment. It meant that there was some sort of sophistication associated with you. Later on, ladies became sort of a derogatory term that was associated with like misogyny and sexual harassment. Later on, ladies became something we associated with young women and teaching them how to be ladies. So like you think of what to aspire to. And so what does this all mean? If I'm, looking or analyzing formation, I might then say formation is about reclaiming what it means to be female. And I would use what I just explained to you about the different definitions of ladies to show how Beyonce is reclaiming what it means to be a woman by taking all of those definitions, new and old, and saying that she's going to define what it means to be a lady, what it means to be a woman, and no one else will. So I hope that was kind of clear, but if not, I have some more stuff to share. These are some other things you can do when trying to analyze. You can look for a pattern, look for repeating words, repeating ideas. You can look for anomalies. Those are things that don't make sense. So when I was talking about patterns or repeating ideas, if you, for example, are listening to a conversation between a white man and a black man in a play, and in this conversation you hear the white man refer to the black man as boy. The repetition of this word might insinuate, it's not even insinuate, it shows that there's a difference in power and also that there is probably some sort of racist undertones in the play itself, but also in this relationship between these two characters. So again, that's how analysis works. You're breaking things apart, looking at them on its own, and then when you put that part back into the whole thing, you're just sort of telling your reader how the work looks different now because you've investigated this one piece of the work. So formation now is different to me because I've investigated this term of ladies. This play is different to me now because I've investigated this use of the term boy. These are other questions you can ask. Which details seem significant? What else could this text mean? What do all of these details have in common? What else might this pattern mean? What does not seem to fit? And here is a image from Claudia Rankine's Citizen. And if it's not clear, it reads, I do not always feel colored. I do not always feel colored. I do not always feel colored. And it just goes on and on and on until eventually it's illegible. And then here it says, I feel most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background. I feel most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background. And then again, it blurs out until it's illegible. And so if I were to analyze this image, I would figure out what part of this I'm interested in looking at on its own. Do I want to look at the word feel? Do I want to look at the fact that it sort of becomes illegible at the end? Do I want to look at the phrase, I do not always feel colored? Do I want to investigate the word colored? These are all possible things I could break apart and investigate. And I'll show you, oh, I guess I don't have it here. Oh, I do. The first part of creating an analysis is that introductory sentence. Now, in a summary where your introductory sentence must include the important details of who wrote the text or what the text is called, in an analysis, sure, that's important, but the most important thing of an introductory sentence in an analysis is to state your interpretation. You're not telling me this, an analysis can't start with Claudia Rankine wrote Citizen. That's not an interpretation, that's a fact. However, you can start your analysis with Rankine's image highlights the inexplicable bond between race and identity. That is my interpretation of this image. And it seems like what I will then focus on is the way that this blurring out of the text with the page with the ink sort of reveals that you might try to separate yourself from race, from others, but in fact, it's like an impossible bond that presents itself whether you like it or not. And I would probably talk more about that, but that's not the point of this exercise right now. The point is to get you to see how interpretation is a necessary part of analysis. And again, analysis is all about trying to figure out what questions you want to ask the text. And so these are some more questions. What do I see that all readers might not see? How can I prove what I see is significant? What patterns do I notice? I mentioned that before. What piece in this whole work changes the way we understand this whole work? So what piece or what part do I want to look at further because it changes the way the whole work is understood? And so again, analysis and summary are very similar. The biggest difference between a summary and an analysis is that an analysis is just interested in supporting an interpretation, and quite often an analysis can involve bringing in outside resources to support that interpretation. And so here is an example from Sanjay's Super Team. Sanjay's super team suggests the reason for generational conflict comes from the lack of compromise. Sanjay refuses to care about praying, and Sanjay's dad refuses to take an interest in his son's games. It is only when Sanjay is taken into the world of his dad's gods that the gods show him the similarities between superheroes and gods. Child psychologists discuss children's cognitive thought patterns and the reasons they need adult concepts like religion, marriage, etc., to be taught through concepts they already understand, like superheroes, sharing, etc. So you'll notice that the biggest difference is I'm not really interested in giving the basic framework of what Sanjay's super team was about. I go straight into my interpretation, and you'll also see that I present outside sources in the form of a psychologist's testimony. Okay, so for your own practice, if you'd like, again, you could do the summary comment that I mentioned before, or you can perform an analysis of an image and post this analysis here as a comment. Just remember, you are not stating the facts of the image in your first sentence, you're stating an interpretation. So don't in your first sentence say something like, the image has a dog and a girl. Instead, an analysis would have something like, maybe the title of the image is Dog Girl. Dog Girl illustrates the bond between man and animal. Right? So there's the difference between fact and interpretation. Okay, so now our final term, synthesis. Rather than sort of talk about what we know about synthesis, I'm just going to give you the definition that I want you to consider when you're synthesizing in this class. Synthesis involves making connections. Synthesis involves identifying a common theme or problem or characteristic in the several texts that you're reading. And so why should you synthesize? Synthesis is important because it's really the one of however many ways you can form new ideas. So I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but often when you're writing something and you might give it to an instructor might present it to you and say, this is great, but you're not really giving me any new ideas. You're simply restating ideas that we've all heard before. And what that means is you're not really doing enough synthesis. My example of synthesis in like the real world comes from soda. Only because I've recently become obsessed with like those soda machines where you can like create your own soda and they give you like 1,000 different options. So an idea like cherries and an idea like Coca-Cola, when you put them in conversation with one another, you get this totally new thing, cherry Coke. And I say totally new thing because it's not cherries and it's not regular Coke. It's its own idea. It's its own thing. However, it could have only happened because cherries and Coke were put in conversation with one another. I know that's like a terrible non-academic example, but that's the best I could come up with. So how do you get to this cherry Coke? How do you synthesize? There are 4 main ways I think you can synthesize, and let's go through these 4 ways. The first is to think about clashing of your texts or clashing of whatever you're synthesizing. So is there a point that 2 or more authors disagree on, that they're clashing on? That can be a possible point of synthesis. You might ask yourself who you agree with and why. So for example, the movie Frozen suggests that sisterhood is the key to surviving without parents. So in Frozen, their parents die within the first 10 minutes of the movie, and the only reason I believe they're able to survive is because they have each other. And so that's, for me, the message of the movie. Meanwhile, a classic like Bambi suggests that friendship is the key to surviving without parents. So when Bambi meets Thumper, when Bambi meets all of these forest critters, that's when Bambi is able to, or that's how Bambi is able to survive without parents. So clearly you can see here then that these two films are clashing with one another. One believes Frozen is, um, one believes survival is about sisterhood, another believes survival is about friendship. By putting these two things together, though, and looking at how they clash, I realize that in actuality, they're both pointing to the importance of finding a mentor. So for Frozen, the one sister sees the other sister as a mentor, and that mentorship figure is the reason why they're able to survive. In Bambi, Bambi sees all these forest critters as mentors, and that's why Bambi is able to survive. So this idea of mentorship becomes my new idea, becomes my cherry Coke, and was only able to happen because I put these two things together. The other way to get to your cherry Coke is handshake. Is there a point that two or more of the authors agree on? Do they agree on this point for different reasons, or do they agree for similar reasons? So, going back to Frozen and Bambi, Frozen and Bambi both believe acceptance is a key to happiness. Frozen believes acceptance leads to happiness because it means you will stop trying to hide who you are. Bambi believes acceptance will lead to happiness because it means you will stop longing for what once was. So Frozen, again, I'm sorry, but I forgot their names. I think it's Elsa. When Elsa accepts her gift of freezing everything, that's when she stops hiding. She comes back from the mountains. And when she comes back from the mountains and she accepts who she is, that's when she's finally happy, right? In Bambi, when Bambi realizes that though Bambi's mom is gone, there's a new life. Excuse me. There's a new life that Bambi must live. That's when Bambi is happy. That's when Bambi reaches acceptance. And so by putting these two things together and looking at how they're both similar, I come up with this new idea of it seems like then both of these movies are also suggesting the importance of being in the present moment. Instead of Elsa constantly trying to escape the present moment, she needs to live in the present moment. Instead of Bambi constantly remembering what was, the mom, the hunter, Bambi has to be in the present moment. And so that becomes, again, a new idea, a cherry Coke. Then there's design. This is, I think, more straightforward. Is the tone similar in the pieces you're reading? Is the writing similar? Why is that important? How does that impact our understanding of the topic or theme or idea? So, in the readings that you read for this module, Anderson's piece about Ferguson and Kuramitsu's piece about camp, both are using historical evidence. That's like a design feature that you might have noticed. And so you might ask yourself in your reading groups why that's so significant. What does that reveal about race? What does that reveal about current events? What does that reveal about current events related to race? And whatever your response is, that could be another possible cherry Coke. And then we have evidence. Are there similar types of evidence used in the pieces that you're reading? Are there different pieces of evidence used but for the same purpose? Again, by looking at how evidence is being used and synthesizing articles to talk about how these pieces of evidence are being used, you might come away with maybe how a piece of evidence has evolved over time, how a researcher is being used as evidence in very different ways, right? So I forget the story, but there was a medievalist scholar or a medievalist text, I believe, that was about really like exploration and about adventure. And however many years later in the current day, neo-Nazis were using that text as evidence that we need we need a different, like, we need a race war or something along those lines. I'm totally botching the story, but the point of this is to show you how you could look at the way a text or a piece of evidence is being used in very different ways, and maybe from that sort of come away with a new idea or present a new idea. Why is it that this text is so easily used for different things? What makes this text appealing when it was actually meant to get other people to explore thousands of years ago and to actually interact with other races and other kinds of people? And then that could be your cherry Coke. And so finally, if you would like, you can take 3 moments in your life, summarize them for yourself, and then as a comment, present a synthesis of these 3 moments. Present a cherry Coke idea that comes from putting these 3 moments together. I can't think of the best example from my own life right now, but let's say that I reflect on when I was, this is not real, when I was 5, I had a crocodile birthday cake, and I remember being really happy about it. When I was 15, I remember the fact that I got an A on a science paper that I was really stressed out about. And when I was 25, I had a really difficult time with teaching a science student, teaching English composition to a science student. And so maybe by putting all of these moments together, I realized that I actually had a deep affinity for science, for marine biology, and that in fact that's a passion that for whatever reason subsided, but that I still long for. None of that is true at all, but that was my example of how you might use this comment as a moment to reflect on 3 different moments. And the reason why I think this is also a great practice is because your autoethnography is about you synthesizing different moments in your life, so why not practice that here? And that is it for us. If you're interested in getting more information on summary analysis or synthesis, because I understand that a short video is not enough, you should check out this website. I will link to it underneath our video. They also give great instructions on these 3 concepts. And I will see you next time for a lecture on quoting and APA.